we will walk a long distance from the Mendel monument down to the University of Vienna. And here we will see where Mendel got some of his very, very important inspirations. Barbara, are you ready? So you could share your screen now.
Let me do this. So can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can see perfectly.
Here we are. So this is the beautiful main building of the University of Vienna, which those of you who know the city are familiar with. This building didn't exist yet when Mendel was a student in Vienna. Mendel studied in Vienna between 1851 and 1853, and this building was only constructed in the 1860s. So why am I showing you this here? Well, because it is the seat of the rectorate of the university, and after all, it is this institution where Mendel got his university education. So after he studied in Vienna, this building, 10 to 15 years after he studied here, this building was constructed on the Wiener Ringstraße. Not even the Ringstraße, which is this boulevard around the inner city, didn't exist back then yet. So this was constructed at the same time when the main building of the university was constructed. Now let's virtually walk in there. This is a public building, so you can just walk in there, and we will see that some of Mendel's teachers are actually featured in the arcades around the courtyard of the main building of the university. So who were those people? What did Mendel actually study at the university? Here I'm showing you a document that describes the list of courses of Mendel during his third semester at the University of Vienna. We know that during his first and second semester, Gregor Mendel studied mainly physics, but then he took lots of courses also in biology, mathematics, and chemistry. So here is up here, actually, in the upper part, he's giving some biographic information. So he has indicated his name here and his address. This is his so-called Inskriptionsblatt in German, or his registration sheet in English, which is beautifully preserved. And down here, he's listing the courses he registered for in his third semester. So we know exactly what kind of courses he took and with whom. And here's my translation. So he took a course in experimental physics, demonstration and experimental physics with Dr. Doppler. And you may already recognize this name here. This is the famous physicist Christian Doppler, who I will talk a little bit more about in a minute. Then he took a course in zoology with Dr. Knack. And now this is quite interesting because you may know that before Mendel started to study at the University of Vienna as a student, he took a teacher certification exam. He wanted to become certified as a teacher because he was already teaching at the time, and he failed that attempt to become certified. And one of the reasons why he failed was because he got some very harsh evaluations from Dr. Knack, his examiner in natural history. So after failing his exam, he went back to study at the university. And what did he do? He went to study zoology with Knack. So that's quite an interesting fact. Then he studied chemistry with Rettenbacher and mathematics with Moth. And then he studied botany with Franz Unger, who I also will talk a little bit more about in a minute. He studied anatomy and physiology of plants, and he also took a course in practical usage of the microscope. And this middle column here in the document are the hours per week. So here you can see how intense those different courses were, and you see that there was still quite a substantial focus on physics. So he was also very good at physics. During in this exam, this teacher certification exam where he failed the zoology part, he was really good in physics. So one shouldn't underestimate his interest and skill there. So now we are in the arcades inside of the University of Vienna. This is the inner courtyard here to the left. And so you can walk down these arcades around the inner courtyard. And here the University of Vienna features some of its famous scientists. There are these busts here on the side where scientists through the history of the University of Vienna, which is slightly above 250 years old, so really an old institution, are featured. And if you walk down, if you further walk down this hallway, you encounter this person here, Christian Doppler, the famous physicist and mathematician, who is featured here. And he was one of Mendel's teachers. Mendel took intense physics courses with him. Christian Doppler was the first director of the newly founded Institute of Experimental Physics at the University of Vienna. He was recruited in 1850, so the year before Mendel came to Vienna. And he basically founded a very modern institute. He involved the students in experiments, in empirical research. The students became part of the research community, so they were conducting their own experiments in the courses taught by Doppler in this demonstration experimental physics, which Mendel took. So Christian Doppler certainly contributed to the mathematical and quantitative education which Gregor Mendel got at the University of Vienna. I want to say a few sentences about Doppler's life. He was born in Salzburg, and then he studied mathematics and physics in Vienna, and also philosophy in Salzburg. And then he taught in Prague. At the time, Prague was, so the Czech Republic, what is now the Czech Republic, was part of the Habsburg monarchy. So this was the same country. Interestingly, Doppler already had contemplated emigrating to America because he couldn't find a suitable position when he finally found a teaching post at a secondary school in Prague. And then eventually he got a professor position at Charles University in Prague. And those were also his scientifically most productive years there. He published his famous work on the Doppler effect and many other important papers during his years at Charles University in Prague. And then he was hired as a professor at the University of Vienna. But he could do this job only for 2 years. So he basically put all his energy into building up this new Institute of Experimental Physics at the University of Vienna. But he didn't have so much energy left because he was already suffering from a lung disease. And his health deteriorated really fast. So he already died 3 years later at the age of 50 in Venice as a consequence of this lung disease. Now, you're all familiar with the Doppler effect. This scientific achievement has found a lot of applications in many sciences, from astronomy to meteorology and medicine. So it is well understood why the University of Vienna features this scientist here in the arcades around the inner courtyard. And here is another image depicting Christian Doppler. You can actually tell that the bust in the arcades is modeled after the photograph. He's wearing the same things here. So this is what he looked like. So physics at the time was very quantitative. When Mendel studied physics, physics was mathematical. The research in physics was quite mathematical. So Mendel certainly got his mathematical training from the physicists, but it shouldn't be underestimated. Mendel's achievement was to take these skills and apply them to biological experimentation. So I think this was really a major achievement. Another one of Mendel's teachers who you can see displayed in the arcades at the main building of the University of Vienna is Franz Unger, the botanist. He also had some quite diverse, he has a quite diverse background actually. He studied law in Graz, and then he studied medicine in Vienna. And then he first worked as a general practitioner in Stockerau, and then in Tyrol for a while as a court physician. And then after that, imagine, he became professor of botany in Graz. So not quite the academic career we have these days, slightly different, much more diverse, not quite so linear, maybe a good thing. And eventually he was hired to the University of Vienna as professor of botany in 1850, so the same year when Christian Doppler was also hired as professor there. Unger had a really diverse research program. He worked on cell theory, he worked on microscopic plant anatomy, he worked on plant biogeography, on paleobotany, and he was also, on top of all of this, an evolutionary theorist. So he had a quantitative approach to his research, not quite as mathematical as the physicists, but he counted fossil species in different geological periods, and then he broke those counts down by a taxonomic group and calculated ratios between groups. So he traced how those ratios shifted over time, and in this way he could show that the flora of the earliest period was dominated by algae, and then there came the ferns and so on, and finally only the flowering plants. So he could actually show that the extinct plant world was characterized by this rising and waning of different taxonomic groups. And he was an evolutionary theorist, so he had very far developed evolutionary ideas. He knew that species were not constant in their characters, but that they changed through evolutionary time. And he made that very clear in his writing. He did not only write scientific papers alone, but he also wrote for the general public. And one series of essays that gained some popularity were his botanische Briefe, or botanical letters, which he published in a newspaper, in the Wiener Zeitung. And one of these letters was about the evolutionary history of plants. And there he expressed very clearly his ideas of common descent of different species of plants. And he actually went even further. He states that he thinks that all organisms must have a common ancestor. So these ideas that were later specified and widely popularized by Darwin were in a much earlier form mentioned to a certain extent, at least in Unger's writings. And those were, of course, controversial ideas, not just in Great Britain, but also in Vienna at the time. So Unger's publications caught the attention of a Roman Catholic priest whose name was Sebastian Brunner. And this priest, he was the editor of the Wiener Kirchenzeitung, so the Vienna Church News, and he was very offended by Unger's writing and published several editorials ridiculing him. So this played out in Vienna, in the Viennese media, in public, basically, at the time when Mendel came to Vienna. The students supported Unger. Sebastian Brunner, the Catholic priest, was very, very clear and very, well, offensive in his writing. So this was certainly interesting times for Mendel, who himself was a student of biology and a Catholic Augustinian monk at the same time. Here's another picture of Unger, the botanist. This is from the archive of the University of Vienna.